This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Concerns mount over rail transport safety in Egypt after yet another deadly derailment. More than 270,000 COVID infections in a day recorded in India as it battles a worrisome spike. And 6 people killed in 3 separate mass shootings in the United States in the past 24 hours. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also ahead on the program, we look at how countries in Africa are trying to balance between a heavy borrowing and sustained economic growth. And Nigerian artist uses his music to foster unity in the troubled Plateau state. We begin in Egypt, where at least 11 people have died following a train accident in the Kalibia province north of Cairo. Around 100 people were also injured. Several train wagons were derailed in the city of Banha. The cause of the accident remains unknown. At least 60 ambulances as well as salvage teams arrived at the scene for emergency operations. Train accidents are common in Egypt due to poor infrastructure. At least 20 people were killed and nearly 200 were injured in March when 2 trains collided near Tata, south of Cairo. And 15 people were injured earlier this month when 2 train carriages derailed near Minya al-Kam city, about 70 kilometers north of Cairo.
I was in the air-conditioned car number 3. Before the station, we were surprised by the train speeding up and we found ourselves on top of each other with dense dust and we could not get out.
In South Africa, University of Cape Town students had to be evacuated as a fire swept through parts of the iconic campus, destroying several buildings on Sunday. As Renee Delcam tells us, firefighters were still battling the blaze late into the night.
The fire is believed to have started as a vegetation fire just before 9 on Sunday morning. The restaurant at the Rhodes Memorial Monument in the Table Mountain National Park went up in flames, and the fire rapidly spread to the campus of the University of Cape Town. The university said in a statement that emergency services had evacuated all students on campus. Evacuate the area, please. Helicopters were working on the fire all day, trying to extinguish the blaze. But several key university buildings were destroyed. Around 4 o'clock this afternoon, this building behind me caught alight. Onlookers on the ground say it could be a lab or a library in an academic department, but that still has to be clarified. This comes close after the music department is said to have been gutted on the lower campus. This historic windmill, a well-known landmark and museum in Cape Town, which was built in 1796, was also destroyed. A spokesperson for Cape Town's emergency services says firefighters will work throughout the night to bring the fire under control. Renee Delcam, CGTN, Cape Town, South Africa.
Well, let's return to our headline story where 11 people have died in Egypt following a train accident in north of Cairo. Well, let's cross over to Adel Mahroui for a quick update on what's going on in Egypt. Adel, there's been yet another deadly train crash in Egypt. What are the latest casualty figures and how are authorities responding to the needs of the injured?
Well, according to the latest health minister official numbers, there has been 11 confirmed deaths and 98 injuries. Most of them, of the injuries, are not in critical condition. So most of them have been already released from the 3 hospitals that have been receiving the injured. Now the rescue part is over, with few exceptions to those who might be in minor in critical health conditions. But the investigations are ongoing, and that has been leading to a new chapter of the file, as currently the investigators from the Prosecutor General's office are listening to the communications that has led to this disaster.
Well, Adel, train accidents are common in Egypt. Now, the wave of accidents is causing serious concerns over safety issues. What needs to be done to minimize the risks of another train accident happening in Egypt?
So just to give you a rough figure, from 2006 until 2018, the average accidents that involve trains or railroad in general are about 1,181 accidents annually. So that's a very huge figure, of course. And we're talking about 18,000 incidents that included the railroad in the past 12 or 13 years. So this is a huge figure, and Egypt knows there is a big shortage of how to come up with such a solution. Egypt's railroad network is very old, and there's billions of dollars required to update the traditional control and safety measures that are in place in most of this railroad network. So the country is currently, has been actually ongoing for the past few years in a project to renovate, first of all, the train safety in terms of locomotives and the carts, to give more safety in terms of structure for the trains themselves. And they're also moving in parallel with updating the security systems, the communication methods, and the traffic lights systems for the railroad, instead of having it manually, to switch it to a automated and more technically smart system to avoid such incidents. This is still going. It needs billions of dollars to be invested in this railroad, which is the organization in general has heavy deficit because the government subsidizes the train tickets for the public, and therefore it's a very complicated issue. But the government is moving forward to renovate and restructure the railroad network. How long will it take? This is still unclear, because it's a huge budget for a country that has been struggling in terms of economy for many years.
Adel Mahroui joining us there from Cairo. India has seen a record rise in COVID cases. It is reported that more than 270,000 new infections on Monday, taking its overall number to over 15 million, second only to the United States globally. Ravinder Boao reports from Delhi.
At the moment, with the second wave, becoming higher than what was assumed, things are actually spiraling out of hand. State governments, central governments are scrambling to, meet the demand, whether it is of the oxygen, whether it is the hospital beds, ICU beds, even ventilators, and even medicines. Remdesivir, which is the antiviral drug which was manufactured in India, that the manufacturing had been decreased from November to January, which was a period of lull, which was the time when actually the governments had to ramp up preparing for the second wave, but that did not happen as far as the governments are concerned. People became complacent from November to January, thinking there is no virus, and look what is happening now. It has come back with a vengeance. People were not following COVID appropriate behavior, and now there is a shortage of basic requirements to actually treat those who are infected by the virus. So that is the situation. Vaccination drive, as it was being said that India is the manufacturer of vaccines, it's now actually importing vaccines in order to meet the domestic demand. The domestic demand has gone higher. Initially it started with a vaccine hesitancy, but now people are lining up to get themselves vaccinated, but there aren't enough doses available, and so all the state governments are requesting the central government to provide them with the vaccination doses, and that has started a vaccination politics in the country. While people are suffering, the political parties are getting into a blame game with each other, and the situation on the ground is really worrisome.
Well, Ravinder Boao is joining us now live for more in the Indian capital, New Delhi. Ravinder, there has been a tremendous surge of COVID-19 infections in India. What are the underlying or contributing factors to this worrying trend?
Well, as I just mentioned a little while ago, the fact is that from November till January, when we did see the peak die down, that's the time when we should have ramped up or prepared for the second wave. on the part of the government, this is totally missing, because even if whatever infrastructure which was built during the first peak, that has also been destroyed, and now we are starting all over again. As far as the manufacturing of drugs is concerned, the moment demand died, the manufacturing also reduced, and now when we need so many tablets or capsules or medicines, they are not available in the market. People are dying because there are no injections to actually help them survive. So that is the situation. People are dying because there is not enough oxygen. So on the part of the government, ramping up of infrastructure or getting ready to face the second wave, which was already known to every scientist or people or governments that it is going to come, the government has been caught unprepared, and same for the people. People also took it very lightly in the last 4 months to not be able to do anything. And the third cause, of course, is the double mutant strain. The virus mutates, and this strain is much more infectious, although we do not know right now whether it is fatal, but definitely looking at the way people are dying because of lack of treatment, we can't say it's the double mutant strain which is more fatal, or is it because of the lack of infrastructure. But definitely as of now we are seeing the number of deaths go up. We are seeing people fighting with each other for the limited resources that are available. Beatrice.
So let's talk a little bit about that manufacturing of drugs and the limited resources, because many countries in Africa are dependent on supplies of COVID vaccines that are being manufactured in India. But India is now prioritizing local consumption over the jabs. How long should we expect this situation to last? And is there a way of accommodating export orders? It appears we have lost Ravinda Boao for now. We will return to her if we can. But let's look at other stories we are following for you today and continue with the coverage of the COVID situation. And in Madagascar, like many countries around the world, is dealing with a second wave of COVID-19 infections. The island nation has recorded over 31,000 coronavirus cases. The surge in infections has put a strain on the country's health system. Ashtatal has more.
Madagascar is battling a second wave of COVID-19 infections. With hospitals reaching capacity, hotels and schools have been adapted to deal with the overflow.
We have the virus, which is the South African variant, and this second wave also. This virus also has a particularity. It triggers more severe forms, hence the increase of death in Madagascar currently.
In addition to a lack of space, some caretakers say they're struggling to access necessary medication.
So far, medicines are free. Except when they're out of stock, you have to buy them elsewhere. Medicines are free when they still have stocks available.
The country's president, André Rajoelina, initially expressed hesitancy towards the use of COVID-19 vaccines. He instead urged citizens to use herbal remedies. The government has now changed its policy and course of action.
We had discussions, exchanges with Malagasy scientists, and then we decided to go for vaccination. This is another way to protect the population. And on this subject, we are currently working on the COVAX initiative.
While the government has now joined the WHO-led COVAX initiative, it continues to push the use of its herbal remedy. Astatal, CGTN.
Well, the global death toll from COVID-19 has topped a staggering 3 million. This comes amid repeated setbacks in the worldwide vaccination campaign and a deepening crisis in places such as Brazil, India and France. CGTN's Wilkisa Nyabwa now reports.
On Saturday, the world's COVID-19 death toll surpassed 3 million people. The country with the most deaths is the United States, with more than 566,000 people dead. Nearly a quarter of the population has been fully vaccinated. Brazil has more than 371,000 deaths, followed by Mexico, India and the United Kingdom. In Mexico, where COVID-19 has killed more than 212,000 people, only 2.6% of the population has been fully vaccinated. India has recorded over 177,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic, putting it in the countries with the highest number of deaths attributed to the pandemic, while deaths in the United Kingdom have topped 127,000. The African continent has so far registered over 4.4 million cases of COVID, with over 117,400 deaths in total. African countries have been vaccinating their populations against COVID-19 for weeks, but progress has been slow. Less than 2% of the 690 million vaccine doses administered to date globally have been in Africa, where most countries received vaccines in small quantities. 45 African countries have received vaccines, 43 of them have begun vaccinations, and nearly 13 million of the 31.6 million doses delivered so far have been administered. The pace of vaccine rollout is, however, not uniform, with 93% of the doses given in 10 countries. And as the numbers continue to rise across the globe, governments are racing to ensure their populations are vaccinated against the coronavirus disease.
Let's return now to India and to Ravinder Boao, where India has seen a record rise in COVID-19 cases. Ravinder, I want to revisit the issue of manufacturing of drugs and the scarce resources regarding COVID-19. Now, many countries in Africa are dependent on supplies of COVID vaccines that are being manufactured in India, but India now says it is prioritizing local consumption of the vaccines. How long should we expect this situation to last? And is there a way of accommodating export orders?
Well, at the moment, the situation is difficult in the sense India is lagging behind in the domestic vaccination program, and that's why they have kind of put a stop or a ban to sending or exporting vaccination doses to any other countries. After donating tens and millions or gifting them or selling them, India decided to concentrate on the domestic demand, and that is why they are putting a lot of pressure on the manufacturer as well as to look at the Indian demand first before actually exporting it. So it looks like it's going to take a while before these countries who are dependent on India in terms of jabs will probably have to wait. Looking at the situation, the manufacturers have asked the central government to give them some money in order to ramp up manufacturing, but at the moment no signal from the central government in terms of giving them that financial assistance. So if they do not get this financial assistance immediately, they cannot actually put in more money in terms of ramping up the infrastructure to, create more vaccine doses. So for the countries who are dependent on Indian manufacturer, of course it is bad news in the sense it's going to take a bit of more time, and also the central government has put a ban on this. So it only has to now come from an international community. When the pressure will come, probably India will be able to, send some vaccines. But definitely, as of now, looking at the situation in India, I don't think the government is anyway willing to let go of the vaccine and to export it further.
Ravinder Boao joining us there from New Delhi. Thank you. You're watching Africa Live. Still ahead on the program. 6 people killed in separate mass shootings in the United States in the past 24 hours. And the impact of the coronavirus pandemic in a resort town on Egypt's border with Israel.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Nigeria is my home. 160 million vibrant, ambitious individuals constantly seeking the perfect self-expression. It is these people who inspired me to be that person that is seen, to be a voice that is heard, and ultimately to be the anchor that I am. I have to tap in, tune in, and turn on the very best qualities within me to deliver the news. I'm Richard Taba, an anchor for CGTN.
It's day 2 of the Boao Forum for Asia in southern China's Hainan province. Chinese President Xi Jinping will deliver a keynote speech on Tuesday via video link. The theme of the 4-day annual conference is A World in Change. Join hands to strengthen global governance and advance a Belt and Road Initiative cooperation. Today begins with a dialogue on the topic of globalization in the post-pandemic era. The agenda mainly focuses on the near future of medical ecology and world economic recovery. Boao is the world's first major international forum to be held offline this year. Over 4,000 participants are in the coastal town. Well, CGTN anchor Tian Wei interviewed Hong Kong Special Administrative Region Chief Executive Carrie Lam about the future development of Hong Kong in Boao.
What do you expect to achieve with your interactions? I know you have a busy schedule with people here at Boao.
Well, the first thing for me to come to a Boao Forum for Asia is to tell the people whom I'm going to meet that Hong Kong is well and alive. Because after a period of almost 2 years of social unrest or even violence and disruptions, I think some people may have a misperception about Hong Kong. What is Hong Kong's future? Is Hong Kong still a good place to invest, to travel, to live and work? So to have the chief executive to tell them in a confident manner
and in person
and firsthand, I hope we'll achieve that effect.
My last question is about the Belt and Road Initiative and where Hong Kong is, particularly Hong Kong's interaction with the mainland, including the Greater Bay Area. Madam Chief Executive, brief us about the latest, because there is a pandemic, so a lot of things are delayed. Where are we now?
Well, in both national initiatives, the Belt and Road Initiative and the Greater Bay Area Development, well, Hong Kong plays a pretty similar role because of our strengths and our unique positioning. We are very strong in professional services. So for the Belt and Road economies, especially for mainland enterprises that wish to set up or to have projects in the Belt and Road economies, they could take Hong Kong enterprises along. We will provide the legal, the arbitration, the architectural, engineering services to support these projects. And we are doing this sort of thing right now. And more recently, the central authorities have agreed that if they are setting up an industrial park in one of these Belt and Road economies, they will particularly welcome Hong Kong enterprises to set up in the parks and give us almost a similar treatment as if we were a state enterprise. So that's a very good initiative. And although under COVID-19 we could not travel, we have been organizing all sorts of Zoom meetings and webinars with Indonesia, with Malaysia, with Thailand, in order to tap into those measures in the Belt and Road economies. Now, the Greater Bay Area is even more exciting because we are part of the Greater Bay Area. Within this economy, with 72 million people and $1.7 trillion GDP, there are abundant opportunities for Hong Kong, also in terms of Hong Kong's professional services. We can provide the financial services that enterprises in the GBA need. We can partner with Shenzhen, with Dongguan, in terms of their advanced manufacturing to grow this international innovation technology hub. Our very good universities are now setting up campuses in the Greater Bay Area one by one. At the moment, there are 5 projects. 5 universities are having projects in the Greater Bay Area mainland cities. And we are now subsidizing 2,000 young people to work in the Greater Bay Area so as to give them a better environment to understand what the Greater Bay Area means for them in the future.
And they will be the messengers.
3 separate mass shootings have hit the United States in the past 24 hours. At least 6 people have been killed and several others wounded in shootings in the states of Louisiana, Texas and Wisconsin. The latest one was in Shreveport, Louisiana. 5 people are reportedly hospitalized after being shot and injured at a liquor store. Police, however, have not confirmed the number of people admitted to hospital nor their condition, but said investigations are underway. According to local media, 1 person was shot in the head while another suffered multiple gunshot wounds. Sunday's incidents came with the United States already on edge over a surge in shootings in recent weeks. On Thursday, a gunman killed 8 workers and himself at an Indianapolis FedEx center. While the United States, where tensions between police and protesters have been running high, demonstrations against police violence erupted over the weekend across the country. The 3 main protests took place in Portland, Oregon, Chicago and Minneapolis. They were in reaction to separate police shootings, and they come ahead of a verdict in the trial of Derek Chauvin, a white police officer charged in the murder of African-American George Floyd. Jagruti Dave has the details from Washington.
The one happening at Brooklyn Center in Minnesota. There have been ongoing protests there, most recently at the local police station, and this is following the shooting of Dante Wright, a 20-year-old black man, by a police officer, Kim Potter, during a traffic stop. And there have been also reports of journalists who have been covering the protests being rounded up by law enforcement. The Minnesota State Patrol said in a statement that while journalists have been detained and released during enforcement actions after providing credentials, no journalists have been arrested. Then we've got Chicago, where hundreds of people converged to protest against the police shooting of 13-year-old Adam Toledo last month. Body-worn camera of the shooting has only just been released, which the mayor of Chicago, Lori Lightfoot, called excruciating and difficult to watch. Protests were generally peaceful, but there were calls for the mayor to resign. If we turn then to Portland, police there declared protests a riot in the end. The protests against police shootings had turned violent. There were windows smashed, local businesses were vandalized, and local reports, and the protests there were in response to police shootings. But there were also local reports of a fatal shooting in Portland itself earlier on Friday.
A remote yet idyllic resort town on Egypt's border with Israel has been economically devastated by the COVID-19 pandemic. Located too far for most domestic travelers to enjoy, Taba relies almost entirely on tourists coming through Israel. But for over a year now, border closures have kept tourists away. Here is Adel Mahroui with more.
It's a city with magnificent nature, unique location, and cultural heritage. Yet Taba has been suffering a lot under the COVID-19 pandemic. The borders are shut, and it's quite far for Egyptians to come here for pleasure.
The Taba crossing is a gateway between Egypt and Israel. It's also the borderline for this remote resort city, feeding it with tens of thousands of tourists every year. But fears of cross-border viral infection has locked the passage for over a year.
On the 18th of March, when the lockdown began in Egypt, Taba became deserted. By June, we decided to follow government health regulations, which are an additional cost to any hotel. Yet, when we reopened, the occupancy rates were 0% in 1 month, 1% in the other, and 5% at best. No crisis before the pandemic has hit us that hard.
Yet every day, Makhlouf is the first to wake up among his staff members. He tours every corner of the hotel, inspecting the cleanliness of rooms, halls, restaurants, and makes sure everything is running in order. Many hotels like this one are draining resources in attempts to survive the COVID-19 pandemic.
We kept our labor. We are paying salaries. We decided to renovate the hotel's interior design. We are living in the hope of the possible resumption of touristic activities. Shutting down the hotel costs money. If we shut for a month or two, water pipes will need maintenance. Some equipment could need replacement.
Of all cities in the Sinai, Taba is the farthest away. It's a 12-hour bus ride from Cairo. So for most domestic travelers, it's not worth it to come here for a short weekend.
Taba relies on two neighboring countries and the border crossing. We are the #1 hotel in Taba when it comes to online bookings. The border passage brings to us tourists from all over the world who are primarily visiting the other countries. They all love Sinai.
In 2020, Egypt's tourist revenues dropped by nearly 70% from the year before, bringing the country $4 billion. Q1 this year is reporting 30 to 40% fewer tourists. Luckily for the tiny city of 1 square kilometer, the border is gradually opening up in April. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Taba, Egypt.
And here's a quick recap now of our headlines this hour. In Egypt, at least 11 people have died following a train accident in the Kaliabia province north of Cairo. Around 100 people were also injured. Several train wagons were derailed in the city of Banha. The cause of the accident remains unknown. At least 60 ambulances as well as the salvage teams arrived at the scene for emergency operations. Train accidents are common in Egypt due to poor infrastructure. In South Africa, the University of Cape Town students had to be evacuated as a fire swept through parts of the iconic campus. The fire is believed to have started as a vegetation fire just before 9 a.m. on Sunday morning. The restaurant at the Rhodes Memorial Monument in the Table Mountain National Park went up in flames, and the fire rapidly spread to the campus of the University of Cape Town. And India has seen a record rise in COVID-19 cases. It reported more than 270,000 new infections on Monday, taking its overall number to over 15 million, second only to the United States globally. State governments and the central government have been scrambling to meet the demand for oxygen, hospital beds, ICU beds, ventilators, and other essential medicine. And that's a look at your headlines. Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's coming up. We look at how countries in Africa are trying to balance between heavy borrowing and sustained economic growth.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
The United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs has joined global bodies in raising the alarm over a looming debt crisis in Africa, compounded by the COVID-19 pandemic. South Africa has been struggling to grow its economy for years. Debt to GDP is already over 80%. Sumitra Naidu takes a look.
The South African economy is expected to grow around 3% this year. This growth would be coming off a low base. Growth in South Africa has been declining for years, while debt has been escalating.
Is important is that South Africa should in fact have a strategy for growth. We should continue to borrow, but ensure that we have a strategy for growth. At 87%, at 90%, it's healthy for South Africa to have that debt ratio for as long as our economy continues to grow.
The IMF's Financing for Sustainable Development Report 2021 found that a third of emerging market economies are assessed to be at high risk of fiscal crisis.
We know that in more than half of developing countries, debt service takes more than 25% of their tax revenue. And this is the figure from last year. And in many of those, the figure is more than 40% of tax revenue that is going into debt service payments.
The IMF's decision to unlock member countries' special drawing rights could be an opportunity for South Africa to solve its debt burden.
You can use that money for whatever purpose you want, but also you can swap. For example, we went to the IMF to borrow this about $4.something billion. And we have almost the same amount in SDR. We can therefore swap that money, pay them using the SDR that we have there and have no debt.
Major infrastructure projects are in the pipeline to boost economic activity and create jobs for the unemployed as the country embarks on its post-COVID-19 recovery.
South Africa's way of investing in infrastructure is through PPPs, borrowing money from the private sector or internationally. But again, those are the places where money is borrowed at very expensive rates. It's unlikely to derail our growth capacity. But what that does is that all the money that you borrow from outside, you have to pay. So there's a leakage out of the economy. So instead of boosting the economy, you're actually flatlining it.
South Africa's woes have been worsened by COVID. The country already has one of the highest rates of poverty and inequality in the world. Research by PwC suggests it could take up to 5 years before the economy gets back to pre-lockdown levels. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
The Egyptian government has begun the process of replacing liquid fuel in vehicles with natural gas. It is an initiative aimed at reducing the dependency on petrol and diesel as sources of energy. As Yasser Hakim tells us, the plans are not limited to private cars and include public transportation as well.
The government has been providing financial incentives for car owners to either convert their engines to biofuel or replace their 20-year-old cars with new natural gas-run ones. Many have already converted their engines.
The benefits of the natural gas is that it consumes less energy, especially with the traffic we have. We consume a lot of fuel and it's more expensive to maintain. So gas is better for my taxi.
The 5-year initiative is expected to cost over $15 billion to subsidize expenses for covering 1.8 million vehicles, as well as building hundreds of new gas stations and infrastructure. But the plan does not only target private cars.
The government is in the process of replacing or upgrading the public service vehicles to run on renewable energy, whether electric or natural gas-powered engines.
Natural gas public buses are currently roaming the streets. Ahmed Magdi takes his bus for its daily round in Cairo.
It's a good system that is effective and saves energy. It's successful and is not expensive in fuel consumption. First, it saves energy. We have an abundance of natural gas that would cost less than importing diesel and fuel. By using local consumption, we save in dollars, hard currency, we create jobs and use cheap energy. It's also environmentally friendly. It doesn't emit any gases or pollution.
Magdi says the feedback from passengers is positive as well.
The sound of the engine is quieter than the fuel and diesel ones and is smoother on the road than the other vehicles. Therefore, comfortable for passengers.
As Egypt's transportation system goes green, more natural gas-powered private and public vehicles will be rolled out in the next few months, followed by electric buses and trains. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
Sudan's Dinder National Park is one of the largest wildlife sanctuaries in the country, but people have in recent years been encroaching into the park in search of new land to grow crop. CGTN's Daniel Arap-Moy reports on efforts being made to mitigate this human-wildlife conflict.
Sudan's Dinder National lies adjacent to Ethiopia's Alatash National Park. The park is home to thousands of animal species which boast the country's most diverse wildlife. Freshwater lakes also surround the park's woodlands and savanna, making it an important flyway for migratory birds as well. But wildlife rangers are battling a looming crisis. Human encroachment in the park threatens to diminish the wilderness.
In the recent period, the park has been exploited through aggressive cultivation, logging and hunting.
These are all threats to the reserve, which is considered the largest reserve in northern Sudan, and has also become the last refuge for wild animals in northern Sudan.
In recent decades, the increased population in the villages neighboring the park has created a huge pressure for new land to grow crops. Cattle herders' traditional grazing lands have been plowed up, leading to the increase in encroachment on the park in search of pasture. The park management says such behaviors are posing an immense threat to the reserve.
There are programs set up by organizations directed to local communities through which they were given fruits from the reserve and have had their quality of life improved and were provided with cooking gas. However, their existence inside the reserve is disturbing.
Human encroachment disturbs the park's wildlife in other ways too. Hungry villagers often harvest wild honey from the park's woods, lighting fires to create smoke to ward off the bees, thus breaching the park rules. Rangers patrol the rugged terrain in search of violators, who can face hefty fines or up to 6 months in prison, depending on the offense. But despite all the challenges, the reserve has remained pristine and managed to maintain its wilderness. Daniel Arap Moy, CGTN.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. A Nigerian artist uses his music to foster unity in the troubled Plateau state.
Mimi sijapiga nyongolo wase pale kuna wase wengi. Ninachezanga na dada yangu juu pia mimi sipendi kukufa. Ilikuwa ni asili yangu ndo pia familia yangu pia iweze kukula. Kwa hivyo mimi nacheza na rada yangu, akili yangu na macho yangu.
Kibira yenyewe ilikuwa mbaya kitambo, kulikuwa na waizi wengi sana. Na siku hizi yenyewe hata unaweza kaa bila kusikia hata mwizi ameshikwa mahali ama amechomwa ama amefanywa nini. Ndio naona yenyewe Kibira raundime si kama kitambo.
It's known without books. It's not easy to make it. To me, as an artist, I believe we only need a tool to bring change. And this tool to me, it can be educational background, it can be a skill, it can be a hobby of what you love.
I wanted to tap into that talent because if you don't nurture the talent while it is young, it gets lost. So I wanted to use my expertise in the media to nurture that talent, to mold them to become the future journalists.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
A Nigerian man is using his music hub to promote peace and unity in the country's north-central city of Jos. He says he's on a mission to encourage citizens to partner in building an undivided city despite the series of crises that have affected the state for 2 decades. Our correspondent Tisem Akende brings us more on that report.
It's another day at this music hub owned by 37-year-old Mermu Pool. Different genres of music are produced from here. Pool subsidizes the studio recording session fees, with artists committing to messages of peace as their main theme. He says his kind of music is inspired by the crisis in Jos.
The primary purpose of putting this outfit or platform together is to promote peace by bringing various artists together to make music and other forms of entertainment, preaching peace specifically, we believe the message will spread faster, and God willing, the state will be healed.
Jos City has witnessed a series of outbreaks of ethnic violence and religious extremism in the last 20 years. And efforts by the government to bring about lasting peace has not been very successful. Human Rights Watch reports that hundreds of people were killed and thousands displaced since 2001. Merimopool believes the music that comes from this hub can capture the emotions of listeners. He helps to promote peace and peaceful coexistence in society, as well as help revive the city of Jos. And his efforts are beginning to draw lots of music artists to join the cause.
People who come to record here are usually of different faiths and backgrounds and denominations. That alone is commendable. I believe that the days of crisis in Jos have come and gone for good.
The artists also target radio stations and online platforms to air their music and reach a wider audience. And some residents attest that music has played a huge role in the recent peace-building process witnessed in the state.
Music has been instrumental to the relative peace we are now enjoying in Jos. We are experiencing a rebirth, and I believe it can only get better.
The state government has urged traditional and religious leaders to sensitize their followers on the need to shun violence and live peacefully. In the meantime, artists like Pool will continue to play their parts in complementing the government's efforts. Tessem Akende, CGTN Jos, Nigeria.
The popularity of domestic animals continues to rise across Africa. Often, middle-class families treat pets as part of the family. But what happens when the beloved family member passes away? Legacy Pet Crematorium helps South African families handle their deceased pets. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
According to Pet Healthcare, a well-respected publication in the pet industry, pet owners experience the same sorrow and heartache when they lose a family pet as we do for the loss of a relative or friend, and that it is important to experience mourning like any other family or friend that has passed on. Here at Legacy Pet Crematorium, they say they believe that pets are family, and having worked with animals for 25 years, they say they understand what it means when one loses a beloved family pet. They therefore treat the deceased pets with utmost care.
If you look at our insignia, Legacy Pet Crematorium is our name. We talk about dignity, compassion, and integrity. And so we are, that's quite kind of an aspirational quality that we try to aspire to. No one's ever fully there, but we try to bring those three attributes into every part of the process.
Webb says Legacy Pet Crematorium collects deceased pets from the respective homes or veterinarian. They then transport it to one of their facilities and cremate them according to one's selected cremation options.
We've got two separate processes. One is the communal cremation, the other is the return of ashes. We've got, at our Gauteng operation here, we've got 5 different cremators, the largest of which can do horses as well, without having to, dismember horses. And 3 of the machines just do the individual cremations, the partition cremations where people get the ashes back.
The pet cremation service has become so popular that Legacy Pet Crematorium has had to expand, while other competitors have also joined the market.
When we started in 1996, we had 5 customers in Johannesburg. And I remember a day where we came back here. In the early days, we did everything. We had 1 employee. We used to drive around. We used to collect the dead pets ourselves. And I remember that our turnover, our first price for a communal cremation was 40 Rand. And I remember getting back to the facility and we'd collected 1 pet. And I can tell you that our costs were way more than 40 Rand for the day. And I thought, what on earth have we done? But fortunately, 5 vets became 10 vets, became 50 vets, became 100 vets. And so it's become increasingly popular.
Webb says they are consistently monitoring international best practice in their industry and that they are continuously ensuring that their cremators are best placed to perform their functions. Yolisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Let's now take a look at your sports news. Here's what's ahead. Jose Mourinho has been sacked by Tottenham after 17 months in charge.